everyone, and welcome back to Frankie Sense and More for another exciting episode of Movies with Meaning. I'm Ishita, your guest host, and with us today we've got our in-house film critic, Brent Marchand. Brent is the author of three books and presents beautifully written movie reviews on his blog, so be sure to check that out if you're looking for some great new movies to watch. The website is www.brentmarchand.com. So, hi, Brent, how are you
Hi,
doing
Ishita.
today?
Welcome to your new home.
Oh, thank you. I recently shifted from India here to Florida. So I'm glad that I'm gonna be able to access like a lot more of the movies that we discuss here on the podcast.
Great, great. So, shall we get started?
Yes, I think we should.
Okay. So, we have five new movies today. Four are worth watching, one isn't. And we've also got a wrap up of a film festival that I screened last month, late last month, with some feature films that are worth watching for, even if they're not out just yet, but to keep an eye out for in the near future. So,
Great.
our first film today is a film called The Duke. And this was the last narrative feature film from the director Roger Michell, who died not too long ago. This is a fact-based comedy drama set in 1961. It tells the story of a rather eccentric wannabe playwright and political activist named Kempton Bunton. He had the idea to help out elderly people and veterans who were on pensions with trying to get the government requirement waived for them to have to pay license fees to watch their television sets, which apparently is a common practice in England. He really felt that television had become sort of a new companion for these people who were elderly and living alone, and that they should not have to pay a fee for that. Well, he started a campaign to try and get it recognized. He even tried avoiding having to pay his own fee as a form of protest, but that didn't go anywhere. He ended up getting thrown in jail for it. So what he decided to do was he was looking for a way to try and draw attention to this issue. And about that time, the National Gallery in England had acquired a painting of the Duke of Wellington, which was painted by Francisco Goya. It was considered quite a plum acquisition at the time because a number of people were trying to get hold of it. Mm-hmm. He figured if something were to happen to this film, this painting, well, it would certainly draw a lot of attention and it might get people interested. So he came up with the idea of, gee, maybe how about kidnapping the painting? Holding it for ransom.
Wow.
Well, it ended up that the painting did end up in his possession, and he was flustered in terms of how he was going to handle it. Mm-hmm. He sent out some ransom notes that weren't taken seriously because the police were figuring there's no way some amateur could get away with doing this. This must be something done by the mob or something like that. So he was getting increasingly frustrated with trying to make his case known. So he finally ended up turning the painting in, and he went on trial for it. Well, what happened from there was a complete, surprising, circus-like atmosphere with a completely unusual and unexpected result of his trial. And this film basically tells the story of how all of that unfolds. It's really quite charming, quite delightful, quite quirky. The story has a number of subplots in it that do slow it down a little bit along the way. But overall, this is a really charming, fun, delightful slice of life film featuring an eccentric character doing eccentric things for an unusual cause. It's currently playing in theaters. I really do recommend it. It was a film that got long delayed on its release because of COVID. It was produced in 2020 and just came out recently.
Wow, that is a long time.
Yeah, so there was a bit of a delay in getting it out, but I think it was worth the wait because it's a good film. It's a fitting tribute to the director. Like I say, this was his last narrative feature. He did make a documentary after this film, but
Mhm.
he died not too long ago. So
Oh,
it's really, I'm glad to see that the work finally did make it into the public eye because it's worth
great.
seeing.
Okay.
I'm sure it'll end up probably streaming or being on cable in the not too distant future. So if you don't get a chance to see it in theaters now, just give it a little time. I think you'll be able to see it then.
Great. Well, that does sound interesting. It sounds very different with the eccentric characters and
It
everything.
really is, and it's got a great cast in it too. The lead character is played by the English character actor Jim Broadbent, who is perfect for the part, just absolutely perfect for the part. And his long-suffering wife is played by Helen Mirren, who basically keeps the household afloat while he's pursuing all of these crazy little schemes that he's trying to do to get his
Hmm.
plays produced and get his political activism going.
Yeah.
And she really uh, kind of has to read in the riot act a number of times to say, "Come on, I can't pull the weight for the household entirely by myself."
Yeah.
So it
Right.
makes for kind of an interesting dynamic in terms of their relationship as well.
Hmm. Well, how much would you rate this one?
I would give this one 3.5 stars.
Okay.
It's good. It's a very good film.
Mhm. Well, that sounds great. So shall we move on to the next film?
Certainly. The next film, in many ways, it has a lot of parallels to the first film. This one is called Brighton Fourth. It tells the story of a former Olympic wrestling champion who lives in the former Soviet state of Georgia. And he's somebody who is always looking out for other people's well being. He's always very compassionate and concerned. And he does it very quietly, but he makes sure that he gets results for what he does. Well, after the story starts out in his home country of Georgia, he lives in the capital city of Tbilisi. He decides to pay a visit to his son, who is living in New York, who he hasn't heard from for some time. He apparently came to the US in order to study medicine. But when his father arrives in the US, he finds that he's working for a moving company, basically because he is trying to pay off an enormous gambling debt,
Oh,
as well as trying to raise money to make arrangements for a green card wedding to stay in the U.S.
oh,
And it's far from the expectations that his father had for him from coming to the U.S. in the first place. So he stays and tries to help him get him back on his feet.
mhm.
In the meantime, he's living in the Brighton Beach area of Brooklyn, which is a neighborhood that's known for a large Russian and former Soviet immigrant population,
Yeah.
staying in a boarding house that's run by his sister-in-law. And he ends up meeting and becoming friends with a number of the people in the boarding house and helping them out of their issues as well. So it's a really warm and touching story, excuse me, about somebody who is really trying to help people, be compassionate, be understanding whenever he can. And that includes not only his son, but also all these other people that he meets along the way. It's a film that really touched audiences when it played at the Tribeca Film Festival last year. It came away winning the awards for Best International Feature, Best Actor, and Best Screenplay,
Wow.
that's quite an accomplishment.
It is.
Particularly since the actor who played the lead, who was himself a former Olympic wrestling champion, this was
Oh,
only
wow.
his second film.
Oh, that's amazing.
He ends up
Yeah.
winning an award like this. But it almost seems like he really was perfectly suited for the part. He fit in just right
Right.
in terms of the temperament and the character that was called for in terms
Mhm.
of creating this persona. So I think this is really something that's very warm and very touching, especially in a day and an age where so many people have become so self-absorbed
That's
over
true.
things that they want only for themselves, not necessarily always caring about other people. He sets a shining example that many of us really could look up to and emulate, and should really make an effort to try and employ ourselves in our own daily lives. So it's interesting also in the fact that he's not opposed to pulling some tactics that are a little bit unconventional in terms of getting results. He
Okay.
draws upon his background as a wrestler, for example, in how shall we say, exerting a little bit of muscle when the need calls for it.
Oh, okay.
He's also somebody who's not opposed to necessarily stretching the truth when need
Mm-hmm.
be, if he knows that doing so will end up helping to helping people who care about those situations to feel better. So it's kind of like the good lie idea, you know.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, he's a very interesting character in terms of
Yeah.
wanting to do what he can to make people feel better, no matter what the circumstances are.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that does sound interesting. So like he does this just to help out the people who are
Yeah,
living there in the
yeah,
community.
that's just the kind of person that he is. I mean, you see that in his homeland even before he comes to the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a brother who gets into trouble, and he helps him out along the
Yeah.
way with no questions asked. And then he just carries on with that when he gets, to the States. So it's just in his character. It's in his nature to be like that,
Oh,
and it's really admirable to see that there are still people like that out there.
yeah, definitely. It's very rare to see that nowadays.
This one is available for streaming, so
Okay.
it is available online, and it's worth the watch. It's very enjoyable.
So how much would you give this one?
I would give this one 4 stars.
Oh, okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's something that we should be sure to watch. And let's move on to the next film for the day.
Okay, so continuing the idea of compassion and concern for others, we have a film from Africa called The Gravedigger's Wife. This tells the story of the unconditional love between a gravedigger who lives in Djibouti and the extensive lengths that he'll go to try and help out his gravely ill wife who's suffering from severe kidney disease. He ends up being pushed to the wall in terms of things he needs to do to try and help the situation get resolved. And it's a fairly simple story in many ways, but it's very touching in terms of seeing the love that exists between these two characters. The lead's played by Omar Abdi and Yasmin Warsam. They're just, you can obviously tell that they're very much in love with each other. The chemistry on screen between the two is tremendous. And the fact that he is willing to go to any length to try and help save her life, essentially, even though it's at great cost and great difficulty to him.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's a story that reminds me very much of some of the tales told by the writer O. Henry in terms of, how far will you go to
Yeah,
help out another person to save their life?
right, like the last leaf.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And in that regard, his character really mirrors the character in Brighton Forth in terms of the lengths that he'll go to help out the
Mhm.
situation. This was a film that was very well received by critics and was considered a really strong award season contender back in 2021.
Oh,
But for some reason, other than a couple of nominations at last year's Cannes Film Festival, that potential never really panned out. And I think that's a big part of the reason why this film has sort of been struggling to find an audience ever since.
oh,
It may take a little bit of effort to find because it's primarily been playing the film festival circuit, and that's probably your best bet for finding it now. I don't believe it's picked up a North American distributor just yet.
okay.
It deserves to. It's a really good film, even
Mhm.
though it's not necessarily what I would call groundbreaking cinema, because it's a story that we've seen in different contexts, a number of times before
Yeah.
in terms of the love story angle.
Hmm.
But it's so well told, it's so well made, and that I think it's really it's worth watching.
Yeah.
And I would really like to see it get a shot at being be able to appear before a wider audience than it has currently.
Right.
In the meantime, if you have a film festival in your area, check the schedule. It might very well be on there. It's played at quite a few festivals up to this point. I think it's probably still trying to shop itself to find a distributor.
Right.
Uh,
Did
it-
you
it-
also watch it at a film festival?
yes, I saw it at the Chicago Film Festival last fall. And it also recently played at the Milwaukee Film Festival, which we're going to be talking about a little bit later.
Right.
So it is getting around, and you know it's been, from what I've seen, a fairly popular screening at all the festivals that it's played at. So this is something that really, I think there is an audience out there for it somewhere. It just hasn't really found
Found it.
the right vehicle to reach it on a full-time basis yet.
Right.
It's kind of disappointing because I've seen other films from festivals that have had less quality to them that have been picked up for distribution, while this one has not. It doesn't seem terribly fair to me that
Yeah.
something this good would be passed over as much as it has so far. So fingers crossed. I'm hoping that it does get out there. It's something that the debut film from a director named Kader Ahmed, and I think he has a bright future ahead of him in terms of future projects, because he did a great job with this one. And I would end up giving it 3.5 to 4 stars.
Oh, wow. Okay, great. Yeah. Well, I hope that it does become available to a wider audience like us. And
Yeah, I hope so too. It's definitely deserving of it.
yeah. All right, great. So moving on to the next film then.
Okay, so next we have a rather unusual film. It's a co-production from Russia, Poland, and Belgium. It's called The Whaler Boy. And this is a film that brings together elements from a wide array of sources that you wouldn't expect ending up in the same story. It tells the story of a teenage boy who lives in an area called Chukotka in eastern Siberia, just across the Bering Strait from Alaska. He lives in a small whaling village. They live a fairly subsistence kind of lifestyle, not a lot of pleasures or amenities, anything like that. But with the arrival of the internet, things begin to change pretty drastically, particularly when he and his buddies, discover the erotic chat sites available on the internet.
Well,
And suddenly you have this 15-year-old who falls in love for one of the models who is talking on the screen. She even kind of flirts with him one time, and he's automatically convinced that, wow, she's my girlfriend now. So he's very anxious to want to meet her. She lives in the U.S., so he decides that at one point he wants to attempt making the crossing of the Bering Strait to get to Alaska, so he could go and join up with his long lost love. Unfortunately, she's not in Alaska; she's in Detroit. So
oh,
he can't quite figure out how he's going to get from Alaska to Detroit to see her. Not to mention the fact that he's got virtually no money. He doesn't speak the language. He's had some trouble at home before he left, so he's kind of on the run in some ways. And of course, there's the Border Patrol that's always chasing people down who are trying to make the Bering Strait crossing.
right.
So he's got a lot of things working against him in terms of what he's trying to do, but he's convinced that, he's going to find his true love at some point. So it makes for a movie that's funny, charming. There are some dramatic elements in it that, are certainly very much in contrast to the main story. One thing I liked about the film is that it moves along at a fairly evenly brisk pace.
Okay.
There's not a lot of extraneous things thrown in to slow things down or to take viewers off the track. It's very, what I would call, economical in terms of its narrative. And that's a good thing to see, because a lot of times you will see movies that throw in things that slow the pace down or take you off the beaten path. And this movie does not do that.
That's good.
One thing I will tell viewers, though, is that it does contain some rather explicit material in the film. There is footage of an actual whale hunt, which may disturb some people. Now, what needs to be understood is that the people who live in this village, whale hunting is a subsistence function for them. It's not like, the commercial trawlers that are going out and doing it for profit. These are people who they're hunting down the whales for their own food and for things that they need on a daily basis. The other thing is that there's also some fairly explicit sexual material in the film as well that some people might be offended by. But if you can look past those things, I think you'll find that this is an enjoyable coming-of-age film in a very unusual setting.
Yeah.
And really very enjoyable in so many ways.
Okay, Brent, so how much would you rate this one?
I would give The Whaler Boy 4 stars.
Oh, wow.
It's definitely a charming and enjoyable little film, and it's available for streaming online.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so this one is readily accessible.
Okay, it sounds like a fun watch.
It is.
Well, moving on to the next film for the day.
Okay, so now we come to the one that I would strongly advise that people avoid at all costs. This is a movie called Men. And I came away from saying to myself, what a letdown. This film was made by Alex Garland, who was the director who made Ex Machina and Annihilation, both of which were excellent, excellent films. And this was such an incredible disappointment that I could hardly believe that the same director who made those films made this one. This basically tells the story of a woman whose husband commits suicide, and she decides to go away to a country estate in rural England to try and heal herself. And when she gets there, some very strange things begin happening. And the film is very good in terms of building suspense during the first hour, and features a fine performance by the actress Jessie Buckley. And I was really curious to see where this was going. Well, in the last 40 minutes, the movie just absolutely falls apart. It becomes heavy-handed, obvious, simplistic, pretentious, and above all, laughable. For a film that is supposed to be saying something profound and doing so in a horror context. It's part of a genre that's been emerging in recent years called smart horror. And Ex Machina and Annihilation, both of his previous films, were definitely very much in that genre. This one was trying to do it, but it just wasn't. And it's a shame because he is ordinarily such a good director that I just could not believe that he would produce something this bad. It's it's the kind of film that that I've heard that every good director has got a clunker inside him or her at some point in their careers. I'm hoping this is it, that he's got it out of his system now.
Yeah.
It's just, I came out of the theater and said to myself, well, there's an hour and 45 minutes I'm not going to get back.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
bad.
it's just really, really awful. And especially since it seemed to be going along reasonably well in the first hour.
Mm-hmm.
The terms of the way the suspense was built, you really felt like this was going to be leading to something significant.
Yeah.
And it was something that was silly in so many ways. And simplistic. I mean, basically, trying to get across the idea that all men are bad and women are always victims. Well, okay. I mean, yes. I mean, we know that men are capable of some really horrid things. And yes, there are plenty of women who have been hurt by really horrid men. But this was just making it so black and white in terms of the way it was trying to convey its message.
Right.
That I was kind of rolling my eyes a lot when I wasn't laughing. I mean,
So it was either of the two.
yeah, I mean, boy, I'll tell you, it's just really a major disappointment. So
Oh.
the other thing that I find kind of surprising too is that we're in the start of the summer movie season, which is typically one of the times when the movie industry makes a lot of its big money for the year.
Mhm.
And they also typically front load what they think are the best options for generating that income at the beginning of the summer movie award season.
Right.
For something like this to come out this early, they must have had really high hopes on it in ways that I just didn't see, because it just, to me, it just did not measure up. And from what I'm seeing from a lot of people who have watched it, it's getting very decided mixed reactions. Some people really like it. A lot of other people, like myself, look at it and say, what trash. I mean, it's just, so I would, for my take, I would say stay away from it.
Wow.
Other people may feel differently, but I don't think it's worth it. And as my rating, it's 1 star.
Oh,
And that's being
really
generous.
bad.
That's
Yeah.
being generous. And that's primarily based on the strength of the first hour of the film, because the first hour of the film is reasonably well made. It just completely loses it, though, when it gets into the final act. And I just said, okay, enough.
That's, I think, one of the most disappointing kind of films, when it sets your expectations high in like the first half and then just doesn't give you what you're expecting.
Yeah, I mean, and especially from somebody who has established such a terrific track record.
Yeah, and in the same genre too. So
Yeah.
you'd be expecting like, okay, this should
Yeah,
be.
I mean, I've made it pretty clear in a lot of my books and writings that I'm not a fan of horror films as a general rule, because I find most of them to be simplistic and predictable and not terribly satisfying.
Yeah.
But I've really been a fan of the smart horror genre, because it's taken a genre and tried to do something more with it.
Okay.
And the director of this film definitely did that with Ex Machina and Annihilation. I mean, they're both great films. If you've never seen them, by all means, give them a look. In fact, Annihilation was my #1 film of 2018.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great, great film. But this is just so far down the ladder. So
Wow. Well, I
that I beat a dead horse to death.
Right. So with that awful film, I think that we've reached our main movies for today before we move on to the film festival.
Yeah, this last segment, I want to wrap up briefly some of the films that I saw at the Milwaukee Film Festival. And the Milwaukee Film Festival, this is my first time attending this festival. Well, I should say screening this film festival. And I was very, very, very impressed in terms of their programming. They came up with a lot of great films. I watched 20 films from the festival, and of those 20, 13 of them received 4 or 5 stars.
Wow.
That's a pretty good number.
It is. That is a lot.
So I really recommend their programming. I really recommend this festival highly. I'm looking forward to attending it again next year, because I was really very happy with what I saw. I do have a blog on my website where I wrapped up everything that I watched. What I want to talk about today, I want to talk about briefly the 4 films that I gave 5 stars to. The first of those is a Canadian film called Scarborough. And this was my favorite film of the festival by far.
Wow.
It tells the story of a working class immigrant neighborhood of Toronto called Scarborough. And it focuses on the lives of a number of the people who live there, specifically 4 children. It follows their stories and their interaction with one another through their involvement with one another at a literacy center run by the Ontario government. And this movie covers the whole range of emotions. I mean, it's uplifting and and inspiring. There are also parts of it that will absolutely break your heart. I mean, it's a well put together film. A debut feature from a directing team of Shasha Nakai and Rich Williamson. And if this is what they did with their first time out, I can't wait to see what they do again. They did such a good job with this film. And just to give you an idea of how well received it was, this film won 8 Canadian Screen Awards on
Wow.
11 total nominations. Now that's impressive to walk
That
away
is.
with a haul of hardware like that on your first film.
Yeah.
Um, it's just so well done. And as I say, it's very touching on so many levels. It's a long movie. It's about 2 hours and 25 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, but it doesn't seem like it. It just absolutely holds your interest so captively that as you're watching this whole story play out, you really can't take your eyes off of it because it just reaches out and grabs you, particularly with the emotions, and holds on for dear life and pulls you in with it. So I really recommend this one highly. It does not have a distributor yet, as far as I know, but I'm sure hoping it gets one because it really deserves it. So
Wow.
yeah, when this one becomes available, go see it. I think you'll really enjoy it.
Yeah, I'm definitely putting it on my watch list, and I hope that yeah, it comes on some of the platforms soon.
Yeah, either in streaming or in theaters. I mean, either way, I don't think it's even
Okay.
playing in theaters yet. So
Okay.
it may be a while before it gets to streaming, but either way, I hope it gets to one or both of those venues sometime soon.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so our next movie is an American film, and actually, we don't even have a poster for this one just yet. We have a movie still. It's an American film called 892, featuring actor John Boyega in the lead role. He's probably best known for his appearances in the 3 most recent Star Wars movies. And I'm really impressed with his performance in this film. He's got a lot more acting ability in the tank than anything he's shown in any of his prior films. This film tells the story of an American veteran from the Iraq War who basically gets screwed over by the U.S. government upon his return. And he tries any number of ways to try and get his veterans benefits, and they keep turning him down. And because of the stress and everything that he experienced with the war and the fallout from the war as a veteran, he finally ends up losing it. And he ends up going into a bank and threatens to blow it up with a bomb unless he gets his way.
Oh,
And it's not so much that he's doing it for the money. He's primarily doing it for drawing attention to the plight of veterans,
right.
people who gave of themselves to help their country and then to not get rewarded for their efforts upon their return. In many ways, this reminded me of the old Sidney Lumet film from the 1970s called Dog Day Afternoon, except that it's a slightly different bent in terms of why he's holding up, why he's taken this bank for hostage as he did. Um, the performance by John Boyega is just phenomenal, as were the performances of all the other supporting characters in the film. In fact, it ended up capturing the Sundance Film Festival Award for Best Ensemble Cast last year. One in particular who's quite good in this is the actor Michael K. Williams, who died not all that long ago. This was one of his last performances. He was outstanding in this film as well. It's just a terrific picture. And fortunately, this one does have a distributor lined up. It's supposed to be released in August in theaters from the distributor called Bleecker Street. So keep an eye out for it. It will be making its debut, and it's well worth the time. And particularly, just if for nothing else than for the performances of the actors in the film.
Wow. Sounds great.
Yeah, really terrific film. The next one is another Canadian film called Memory Box. And this tells the story of a young Canadian woman of Lebanese descent who emigrated with her family to Montreal after escaping Lebanon's civil war in the 1980s. And she's been living a fairly normal life with her family. But one day around the Christmas season, she ends up receiving a package for her mother filled with journals, photography, cassette tapes, all sorts of memorabilia from her mother's days in Lebanon when she was growing up during the Civil War. And her daughter is naturally very curious about this, but her mother doesn't want to talk about it. She just feels it's too painful for her to relive any of that. But that doesn't stop her daughter from pursuing an investigation into the materials in the box anyways. And she's interested mainly because her mother has always been somewhat closed off about her past. She wants to know more about her mother's upbringing when she was her age. And she ends up finding out all kinds of things about her mother when she was an adolescent herself, in terms of the passions she had, in terms of a romance that she had when she was younger. And when mom finds out that her daughter's been looking into this, she's furious. But basically the daughter says, look, I want to know who you are. I want you to tell me about this. And that ends up opening a whole new venue for their communication with one another, and her rediscovering what her mother is like and rediscovering what her past is like and renewing ties to Lebanon for everybody involved. It's a really very intriguing movie in terms of the way it unfolds very gradually and gives you a portrait, almost as if you're watching the portrait of her mother being painted on screen for you. Wow. It's really quite moving in terms of everything that she had to go through to live that life in Lebanon during the days of the Civil War. I mean, Lebanon at one point was considered, it was called the Switzerland of the Middle East in terms of its beauty and its opportunity for art and entertainment and so forth. And then all of a sudden, all this craziness broke loose with the Civil War, and all of that came crashing down. And for a young woman who had so many interests along those lines, this was just devastating.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why she and her family felt they had to flee, and also why she didn't want to look back. But her daughter was encouraging her to do it because she said, I want you to rediscover the person you were, because that was a beautiful person to begin with. It's a really touching film in many ways. It's also kind of shocking in some ways to see just the horrors that went on during that time in Lebanon and what people had to endure. The film is really very well made. It's a little bit slow toward the end of the first hour, kind of like it sort of like sags a little bit in the middle. Mm-hmm. But given everything that comes before it and comes after it, I can overlook that. And I would still give it a 5-star.
Wow. Yeah, that does sound beautiful.
Yeah. Now this one, I believe, has a distributor lined up. It hasn't been made available yet. Okay. But I think it is going to be available for streaming sometime in the not too distant future. Okay. Don't quote me on that because I haven't been able to pin that down, but that seems the trajectory that this film is on.
Right. Great.
Okay. And finally, the last film from the festival, it's an American documentary called Mama Bears. And this is a good film to help kick off Gay Pride Month in many ways. This is a film that tells the story of a number of women who are fundamentalist Christians who have children who are members of the LGBTQ community. And their efforts to basically disregard what their religious leaders have told them that they must do, which is disavow their children, ignore them, disown them, whatever they have to do. And they refuse to because they're their kids. and they love their kids no matter what. And it's interesting to see the different perspectives that these women had to go through to reach the point where they could be comfortable enough in their own skin to say, I'm going to love my child no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
It's very uplifting. It's very inspiring. It's so encouraging to see parents who are willing to step out of the shadow of what their religious leaders are telling them that they must do and follow their own hearts. The Mama Bears is an organization that is in existence across the U.S. They end up helping to counsel similar parents who are similarly situated to where they are.
Mm-hmm.
They also work with the kids themselves in terms of helping them develop their own level of acceptance, helping them to figure out ways to discuss these topics with their parents if they're not necessarily willing to do so. They've been active in going out to a number of pride celebrations across the country to spread their word about their group. It's really very touching in so many ways. The one thing that all of them just about will virtually agree on is that no matter what, we will always give you the hugs that you deserve. And that just absolutely, as a gay man myself, that absolutely just touches my heart in so many ways, because to see that unconditional love and support that they're willing to give when they've been so conditioned against doing that is really inspiring and uplifting. So this documentary has primarily been playing at festivals and special screenings. I would like to hope that it gets a general release as well. I was hoping it would do it in time for Pride Month. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But you can certainly find out more on the film's website, and you can also find out more about the organization they've got a webpage on Facebook, and they've also got their own website as well. So it's a very worthwhile cause in many ways.
Right.
So.
Wow, I really love I think all the 4 films that you reviewed from the film festival, and I did read the other reviews as well. I think there's some
and
films.
The other 9 films that I gave 4 stars to were not slouches by any stretch. I mean, they were all really good as well. So if you want to find out information about some really good films out there, look to the blog on my webpage, and you can read all about them and see more about them. Some of them are touching, some of them are funny, some of them are documentaries. You've got a whole array of topics, and they're all really good films. And some of them are going to be available through mainstream sources. So get the chance to go see them. By all means, go see them.
Definitely. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the show then, Brent, unless you've got any announcements.
No, I don't have anything more other than to say that, we'll be back later this month for a second round of films.
Yes.
There are a couple of summer blockbusters coming out between now and then. And we'll probably have a few additional Pride Month offerings to talk about. So in the meantime, enjoy the movies. There's a lot to watch.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you again later this month.
Great. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Brent. Bye.